one of the major reasons why Indonesia has been successful is because I think there are two things, right? I mean, we have a very large population. I think almost 280 million population as of 2020, and also secondly, we have a very supportive government who's really supporting the whole startup ecosystem scene.
Techsauce Global, sparking innovative thoughts. Now, a lot of attention has always been towards Indonesia when you talk about the tech industry and the startup industry. So it is exciting today on our Techsauce Global podcast, where we're going to take a look at what's been going on in one of the biggest ecosystems here in Southeast Asia and what should we look forward to in 2023. Hello, I'm Chawarat Yongjiran Arpupe, a global content editor at Techsauce Media, and you're listening to the Techsauce Global podcast. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about Indonesia, where we've seen the giants, come out, whether it is, Gojek or Traveloka, and it's just a very, very interesting ecosystem that everyone is attracted to. So it's no surprise that we had the opportunity to speak with someone that is pretty much in the forefront in investment in startups in Indonesia. And that is Kevin Wijaya, the director of CyberAgent Capital Indonesia, which is one of the subsidiaries of CyberAgent Inc. And he's in charge of, investing in startups. And so we're so happy to have him today. Sarika, hello.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to today's session.
Yes, I'm very excited to speak to you as well because
Likewise.
like a lot of listeners, probably want to know how things have been in Indonesia. But before we go and take a look at that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Absolutely. So I'm Kevin. I'm in charge of handling the operation and investment operation for CyberAgent Capital in Indonesia. We cover primarily Southeast Asian market plus Japan, China, Taiwan, and the US market. So I'm personally handling the Indonesian market plus Singapore and Malaysian market. So a bit about CyberAgent Capital. We're actually one of the subsidiaries of CyberAgent Group based in Japan. CyberAgent Group itself, they're a listed public company in Tokyo Stock Exchange since 2003. We were first established since 2006. We first came into the Southeast Asian landscape in 2011. We focus primarily on early stage investments with heavy emphasis on consumer tech related business companies. So some of the notable portfolio companies that we've got, we have Tokopedia, e-commerce in Thailand, Tiki.vn in Vietnam, KakaoTalk from South Korea, Iter Group from China, and a lot more. So we focus mostly on consumer tech related business companies in the early stage scene.
So cool. So with that, we are riding out, we are almost towards the end of 2022. Everyone is kind of tired. I think in terms
Yeah.
of like everything reopening, everything trying, we're trying to, ride the bicycle, you could say again, get back on the bike with the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you give
Mhm.
us the latest updates on what's been going on in Indonesia's startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think everything's pretty much, especially in Indonesia, has come back to normal again, even though COVID cases are still rising. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, fortunately, the government has been very effectively handling the overall cases. Especially the government is now pushing people, especially for the elderly people, to get the second booster shot, which is actually a very good news for the overall economies because COVID cases have been relatively stable. And I think for the overall market scene, people have basically come back to normal again. And it is expected that in terms of the GDP growth rate, we should be able to achieve about 5.7%, I think, based on what the government estimates, which is uh, better than the average growth rate compared to other neighboring countries. So we're actually doing quite great, but of course there's still a lot of things to catch up, especially reaching the level before the pandemic level. But I think I would say, fortunately, this is a great time for many economics to and many businesses to rebound again.
In terms of comparing, the time during the COVID-19, the past few years to now, how would you say it is for the environment is for, startups right now?
Yeah.
Certainly in Thailand, we've seen a very big difference. People are really, like they're you're getting stronger in terms of the startups and everything. But what's the sentiment right now?
Yeah, I think the sentiment right now is that I think it's I mean this kind of rebounds effect, it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean on one hand it's good for the overall economics. People are basically coming back to work again, businesses get their customers coming back again. But on the other hand, for the startups, of course there's a sentiment that there's been a massive layoffs everywhere, as we can see. Meta, Amazon, Apple. Well, I don't think Apple did that, but Google basically
Yes.
did the massive layoffs, and that's the same thing happening in Indonesia too, because I think they really misestimated the overall growth rate post pandemic, right? I mean, they thought that everything will be doing really great, but apparently, people are coming back to the offline scene again rather than spending much of their time online, and that's actually what caused the overall, startup winter thing, so to speak. So that's why, unfortunately, this kind of, positive rebound is actually a double-edged sword. For some people, they really enjoy the benefits, but of course, for some people, unfortunately, they have to experience this kind of, winter thing, which one of them is in layoff form.
It can't be helped. I honestly think I think we're all experiencing it in terms of the fact that COVID-19 is not a regular thing that happens every day.
Yeah.
And it's a new thing. And it's no wonder that, certain industries were successful during that time. And then, there was so much investment. And then afterwards it's not the same.
Hmm.
Human behavior is unpredictable
Yeah.
at a certain level. So in terms of what is hot now, let's just say, because you have had a lot of successful unicorns coming from Indonesia. Um, as you mentioned earlier, there are a lot of big giants that are still very successful now. Can you give us an update on what has been the industry that has received a lot of attention recently, in coming off of the whole hype of online
Yeah.
activity?
Yeah, I think so officially in terms of the number of unicorns, there are currently about 13 that are publicly disclosed. 13 unicorns as of today. So of course the one that's getting the attention recently is obviously Blibli.com. Blibli is part of the now is part of Jarum Group. Jarum Group is again one of the largest conglomerates in Indonesia, and they recently just went IPO. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and of course, the IPO was quite successful. So that's why I think people paid a lot of attention to that. And considering that Blibli took that kind of movement during this kind of winter thing, startup winter thing, a lot of people praised their decision to, to go IPO during this time. And I think their decision to go IPO really helps the overall ecosystem, right? Because it proves that, especially to, other startup players or other investors, that the startup scene in Indonesia is still healthy, even though we have this startup winter issue or recession issue, but it won't really affect the long-term ecosystem of the startup in Indonesia, and that's actually a good thing. So I think yes, I think I would say Blibli is definitely the one that received a lot of attention recently. Mhm.
What would you say is the attractive industry right now?
Yeah, I think so it used to be it actually used to be crypto, right? Crypto and Web3, but unfortunately it's still within the gray area. And I think a lot
Mm,
of especially with the downfall of FTX, it really also affects the whole overall
mm,
industry of crypto. Basically, people are becoming I'll say pessimistic about the future of crypto. So I don't think
mm,
crypto can hold that kind of title anymore. But I think I think payment is still definitely the one that that's still doing really
mhm.
great right now. So because recently we also had new unicorns in terms of payments. So we got Sendit, which is a payment gateway company that recently received a unicorn status. I think sometime within the pandemic year. And also we had Akulaku as well. So Akulaku is like a P2P lending company or a buy now pay later company that also received a unicorn status. So I think fintech is definitely the one that's still very popular among the nations, and of course that's also related with the financial digital finance adoption method that's being adopted by many Indonesians right now. So basically, a lot of people have been really helped with the feature of the buy now pay later, because as you may know, only very small percentage of Indonesian people who own credit cards, and it's not so easy for them to access credit cards. So that's
Mhm.
why, a lot of marketplaces or independent players, they recently launched an buy now pay later feature, which is have been a very valuable thing, very helpful thing for these society. So I think also fintech is definitely the start of the show right now.
That's the cool thing, isn't it? If you want to be more optimistic about the situation, the one thing definitely that we got from the COVID-19 is fintech, being
Mm,
pretty much like a champion in terms of disrupting, consumer behavior. And as you said, that was one of the talking points I was going to talk to you, but might as well talk about it. In terms of the behavior of using cash.
mm,
I myself in Thailand. People are using less and less cash,
yeah,
not only because you're scared of the germs, but because of the convenience.
yeah,
The mobile phone is so much precious now, so much
yeah.
more precious now. So would you say that's kind of like similar to what you're seeing in Indonesia, also in terms of the easy loans and everything, and across the region? Do you think that's what's really been going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so again, in terms of credit card, even though the percentage is very small, but I would say in terms of bank account ownership, it's definitely getting much higher than, let's say, pre-pandemic era.
Mm,
I would say, I estimate, I think about 30%, 40% of the population, definitely they already have their own bank accounts. So of course, that kind of ownership really accelerates the digital adoption of fintech, right? So, and even though Indonesia is still primarily cash-based society, especially in the, let's say, rural areas or tier two
mhm.
or tier three cities, but the adoption of digital payments have been very prominent everywhere, meaning that even though you shop at the street food vendors,
Yeah.
you'll be able to, you'll be able to see the QR code that you can pay either via Shopee Pay or GoPay or even OVO. So it's very convenient right now. I mean, you don't see that kind of thing 5 years ago. I mean,
It's surreal. Yeah,
yes,
it's surreal.
it's very surreal.
I'm
So
gonna say I'm gonna just admit it, I'm old.
yeah,
I know when the QR code came, I was like, "Ah, okay,
yeah,
it could take on I don't know how much," and it was a lot of hype, but now it's like,
absolutely,
"Oh my goodness." The other day, I was at the shopping mall, just, to share
yeah.
some, anecdote, like, I overheard a cashier, like, they had an error or something, and, they said, "Oh,
Mhm.
excuse me, we won't be accepting cash."
Ah, okay,
At this
okay.
register. I'm like, "Whoa." Usually, it's the other way
Mhm.
around, like,
Yeah,
technology fails and
exactly,
we can only accept cash, so that's really fun.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so then, going back to Indonesia and how, it's always been a really great ecosystem, at all aspects. What do you think makes Indonesia so unique that it's been able to provide that, healthy environment to produce, unicorns for so long?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the major reasons why Indonesia has been successful is because I think there are two things, right? I mean, we have a very large population. I think almost 280 million population as of 2020. And also secondly, we have a very supportive government who's really supporting the whole startup ecosystem scene. So for example, the QR thing, actually it was the government that launched the what they call as QRIS. So it's like a nationalized QR system. So every bank must adopt it. So basically, if you come to Indonesia, you'll see that, at a merchant store or street food vendors, you'll see a QR code that's actually been standardized by the government. So that's actually very helpful in terms of, let's say, in this case, fintech adoption. And
Mhm.
on one thing is that the government also, they really support in terms of the incubator system, accelerator system. They actually even launch their own initiatives, which is, I mean, even though, let's say, the quality may not be as, as advanced as, let's say, private accelerators, but still, that's something that we should also give compliments, that at least the government is doing something real to really help the overall ecosystems. But I think most importantly is that what makes Indonesia is very attractive for even for future investments in the startup is that we have a huge population that's really getting um, more mature, meaning that they're not being awkward anymore in terms of using technology or
Mm,
shopping online or even using
mhm,
fintech. They're
mhm,
not that awkward anymore, unlike, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago. We are
mhm,
much more advanced right now, especially the potential in outside urban cities like tier 2 or tier 3 cities. There's
mm,
still a lot of untapped potentials in those areas. But of course, something that to note, especially for future investors or future startups, is that the people in tier 2 or tier 3 cities, they cannot be treated the same way like people, let's say,
mm,
in Jakarta area. they,
mm,
they do have the money, they do have the
mhm,
income, the disposable income, but you cannot assume the same way, to treat those people like the people in Jakarta area, because they don't want to be treated the same way. So I think it's the homework of the startups and the investors to find out how how I can actually serve these people with the right solutions, but at the same time, I can also scale my solutions for the long
mm,
term. So I think that's going
mm.
to be the hardest question that they must answer, because again, once they find the right solution, for the people in those areas, I think the opportunity to become the next unicorn is definitely wide open. That's
Mm.
my personal thought. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier just a minute ago about the government's role. But in terms of investment, where do you think most of the investment comes from for startups?
Most of the investments still come from the private sectors.
Mm-hmm.
So the government also launched their own VC funds, right? So I think we currently have three right now. So basically, all the major state banks, they have their own VC arms as part of their subsidiaries. So it basically comes from the balance sheet. So that's actually one of the things that the government supports, but they typically support more on. So they do have basically in general, they do have two kind of funds, right? So the fund that's for a growth set and later stage, and the fund for the pre-seed stage. So I think they've also been actively investing a lot of companies recently, especially with MDI. So MDI is basically one of the subsidiaries of Telkomsel Group. So Telkomsel is like a telco group owned by the government. And yeah, I think that they've become one of the most active state-owned VCs in the scene recently. So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's. But of course, the majority still come from the private sectors and like us. Yeah.
Mm. In addition to this, can you give an example of an interesting accelerator?
Yeah, accelerator wise, I think by the government, of course, they recently launched. I think it's. I think especially it was very active during the pre-pandemic. I think it's called the National Movement of 1,000 Digital Startups. I think that's what they call in English. And
Mm-hmm.
also, but of course, the private accelerators, the one that's been very active is, of course, we have Plug and Play from the US. So they do have an office in Indonesia. They've also been very active in holding accelerator programs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow, cool. So, all in all, I mean, I was kind of going to hone in terms of what the part or the role that the government plays in all of this, and you kind of was very, uh, great in explaining their role. But for those who want to understand more about the government, is there anything more that you can add in terms of how the government has been promoting startups and supporting the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think so. They do usually have what they call as the next Ticorn and let's say Hub IT, right? I think so. Basically, those two events is like a meetup, a speed dating program for startups, and so basically they invite VCs, active VCs in the region, and also early stage startups to do a speed dating with the investors. So I think they do it annually. Last time they did it, I think it was back in September in
Mm-hmm.
Bali as part of the G20 event. So I think that's the kind of the some few examples how they actually support the overall ecosystem. But also on the other hand, depending on which industry that you're from, for example, if you're related with the creative industry, of course, the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, they do have like a grant program to give to the startups up to like 10,000 USD as a kickstart, to help these small entrepreneurs to grow their company. So
Mhm.
Each ministries actually have their own different programs. Of course, it may seem redundant, like why do you do separate things while you can actually do it all at once? But it really depends on the which industry that you're actually from. So, for example, if you're focusing on agriculture tech, obviously we're talking about of the Ministry of Agriculture. They do have their own separate programs, and the Ministry of Communication and Information and Technology, they do have their own program, the accelerator program. Same thing of the with the Ministry of Tourism and Culture. So I think that's like the few examples I would say how the government actually support the startups in real life. But I think from the VCs private sector perspective like us, we think that this kind of initiatives has been quite impactful to the overall ecosystem because it gives confidence to early stage startup entrepreneurs that what they do is that there's still a lot of potential to grow their business. And again, the business that they can do doesn't really have to be just in Jakarta area. I mean, they can
Mm.
expand to other
Mhm.
areas, even though they're located in small city in, let's say, in Sumatra or in Central Java or East Java. They
Mm.
can feel confident that there will always be potential to explore, and they know that the overall infrastructure, including the government and the private sectors, are supporting them in doing that.
I think actually that kind of framework works very well for a country like Indonesia because you're so, as you said, the population's so big, you have so many sectors, and so like I guess if you're a startup, you really need to know as well in terms of which
Yeah,
one or which agency or which department best suits you.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so let's talk about the challenges and opportunities then in terms of, more in details. I'm sure a lot of people are listening who either are startups or, corporates or whatever who are
Mhm,
interested in Indonesia want to know the challenges and opportunities. I think I kind of got the gist a bit earlier of what you said, the challenges maybe in terms of the geography
mhm. Yeah,
of the country and also the various different groups.
yeah.
Would you say that? What are the main challenges? Let's talk about the challenges first then. What are the main challenges right now that's facing the country?
I think the main challenges right now is that I think you've perfectly said that before. So basically, we're like an island country, right? I mean, we have 17,000 islands, so we're basically scattered everywhere. So of course, each region has their own characteristics, preference, and their own unique local problems. And that becomes challenging where everything is concentrated only in Greater Jakarta area because that's what unfortunately what most VCs and most people know because a lot of the VCs, their office is literally located in central Jakarta area. So
Mm,
unfortunately, there's like I would say quote unquote discrimination issue. So if you are a startup founder who's coming from outside Jakarta, especially from outside Java Island, the chance of you getting to be connected just to be connected with VC, I would say it's quite slim because again
mm,
they will just underestimate you and unfortunately that's still natural. I would say not only in Indonesia but also anywhere else that has like
mm-hmm,
a very huge geography. So I
mm-hmm,
think that still becomes the main challenge is that there still isn't a feasible way to really connect these early stage entrepreneurs, especially from outside Greater Jakarta area, to be you know properly connect with the stakeholders in the industry. So that still becomes the number one challenge in the overall landscape, I would say. But the secondly is, of course, um, I think in terms of the new innovation is that the regulation also comes quite slowly, meaning that let's say like crypto thing, it wasn't really clear whether crypto was actually okay or not, right? I mean, the government didn't really say that, so I think that also becomes tricky when players like those especially who would like to start out in the crypto business or let's say Web3 based business, they're not even sure whether this kind of business is allowed or not until later on. If there's a criminal case related with the industry, then the government will take action and then
yeah,
basically say, "Hey, you guys are not allowed to do this." So I mean,
yeah.
that's really unfortunate for the players who have done it, right?
It's
So
all over the world, though.
yeah, it's
That's a
all over.
universal problem.
Yeah, it's all over
The
the world.
regulators don't they it's always like like who can it's always like kind of the parallel situation, isn't it? That they really have
Exactly.
to like, you know be able to regulate, but also support innovation at the same
Exactly.
time. I
Exactly.
just wanted to follow up a little bit on the geography a bit because I'm curious, like, with the jump towards technology and connection through online activity, did that help in any way during COVID-19 in terms
Yeah.
of making it easier for, for startups
Yeah.
to seek out VCs who are mainly in Jakarta?
Yeah. I think the COVID pandemic really definitely helped the accelerating digital adoption, especially for people outside Greater Jakarta area. They're becoming more comfortable with using technology, shopping, fintech, getting loans, or even for education. So I'll say the COVID pandemic really had its own silver lining, which helping people to be more comfortable with the technology. But I think moving forward, of course, the adoption is that you know, we still have a very fast, class groups, I will say, because a lot of people still have their different preference, different
Mm,
local unique problems. So I think it's definitely the challenge for a startup is actually how to actually provide the best solutions for the people. So again, like what we discussed earlier, you cannot really assume that the people in outside Greater Jakarta area, they have the same problems like you do in the urban
mm,
cities. I mean, they have their own unique problems. They have their own characteristics and preference. But what you need to remember is that they do actually have the money. They do have the disposable income. So that's something that you cannot ever forget. So I think again, with
yeah.
what
Don't
that means
don't
is,
overlook that. That's also in terms in Thailand as well.
yeah,
A lot of regions that were overlooked now are getting a lot of attention
hmm,
slowly.
yeah,
Uh, and I think we kind of went into the opportunities already.
yeah,
Are there
yeah.
any additional opportunities for startups right now that we haven't mentioned in Indonesia?
Um, so you mean in terms of the sectors?
For opportunities for startups looking, let's go into the foreigners, and let's take a look at people who want to go into Indonesia right now.
Hmm.
What would your advice be for them? What are the opportunities that they should look into, in addition to what you said, understanding the region and
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
understanding what solution you can provide for each of those regions.
Yeah, I think for especially for the foreigners or international investors who are looking to invest in Indonesia, I would say really pay attention on the long term game. So I mean, don't really compare what's happening globally is also going to be the same thing like in Indonesia. So for example, people assume that Web3 investments, it's gonna be a massive, super massive thing in Indonesia. But I mean, again, I cannot speak for other countries outside
Mm-hmm.
Indonesia, but I'm quite confident to say that in Southeast Asia, we haven't really seen that kind of applications, right? I mean, in real life basis, we don't really see that kind of application. So so that's the kind of thing. So I think my quick tips for international investors who are looking to invest, especially if it's their first time investing in in the Indonesian landscape, is that really pay attention to the local characteristic, the local problems of each region. But I would say really support Indonesia. Again, what they need to be aware is that it has a massive potential. So the opportunities, it's wide open outside the urban cities. So I think that's really the opportunities that they need to be really aware of. That I think that's and this kind of thing is really a lot of times overlooked by these investors, right? I mean, they only know investments that are applicable from their own home base, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if they know that
Mm-hmm.
something is successful, let's say from Singapore, they assume that it's going to be successful as well in Indonesia. I mean, doesn't really work that way, even though we're, really
We're
close
close.
neighbor.
Yeah,
But
but no,
it's
close
not
but different.
a
I
very
agree.
a
I agree.
whole
Yeah.
different,
Yeah.
a whole different, and that's actually the thing why Indonesia has so many unicorns, right? I mean, these unicorns they actually understand the market, so they don't
Mm,
just want to be another wannabe, like oh I'm very innovative company, blah blah blah. What they do is that, for example, like Tokopedia is basically like the blueprint of Amazon, right? I mean, they just want to be a marketplace for people, but they really don't replicate of what Amazon is doing. So they provide their own unique style or their own unique business model, and they became successful. Great timing is also one thing that, of course, international investors must be aware of, is that
Mhm.
you need to have a great timing to enter the market, because otherwise, if let's say you find a company that's been who's doing something that's been done by other big companies, then of course doesn't make sense to invest in that kind of business, right? Because again, the competitive landscape is not attractive anymore. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's just like one example. Yeah.
No, that's a great example. I think timing is really important. It's really important, right? You
Yeah.
can't just go like, "Oh, Web3," and then like, "Oh, it's silence." You're
Yeah.
met with silence.
Yeah.
Um, Lastly, what do you expect for the year 2023?
I think I expect that Indonesia, the overall market will remain strong. Of course, I mean the domestic demands is definitely something that really supports this kind of growth rate. So even though, let's say, the developed countries expected growth rate may be declining, so that's why people are assuming that most big countries will come into a recession. I don't think that's going to be the case for Indonesia, because again, our domestic demand is very strong. So that's
Mhm.
why opportunity wise, sorry, opportunity wise, I think it's definitely be wide open. So I think expect something that's related with, you know, I think for 2023, people will start, move out of their comfort zone. So for example, people only, investors usually only invest in, let's say, pure technology business companies,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
as you can see right now, many investors are now becoming more comfortable in stepping out of their comfort zone in investing in, let's say, less technology company, for example, like direct to consumer business. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, we've seen the success case with Kopi Kenangan from Indonesia, Flash Coffee from Singapore. So, I think more and more investors are becoming more comfortable in investing in that kind of business. So essentially, in order for you to for a startup company to be successful, you don't really have to be doing a pure technology business, but sometimes that combining traditional solutions with modern technologies can be very successful. Again, the real life case, Kopi Kenangan or Luckin Coffee in China. Well, even though Luckin really blew that, but basically, I mean, that kind of business solutions. I mean, it's really something that can be really accepted by the vast majority of Indonesian people in this case. So that's why sometimes you don't really have to overthink on what kind of business I can do to really become big. Sometimes, again, combining all technology, all solutions with modern innovations. I mean, that's something that can be really successful, because what makes a startup successful is not just about the products, right? But it's also about the brand value. What kind of value that they're actually giving to the consumers, how they can be at the forefront with their own brands. So I think moving forward, I think we'll see a lot of new big startups coming from that kind of scene. Sometimes something in less pure technology business. I think we should expect that. I think in 2023.
Well said, Kevin. Well said. I think that was excellent. I am so happy that I was able to talk to you today. I think that I could talk to you longer than this, but
Sure.
maybe in the future we can invite you again for our podcast because,
Thank you.
as always, things are always changing. And thank you so much for giving us such a great picture on what's been going on in Indonesia in terms of its unique geography, in terms of the importance of timing, and also you know something that I think people should really talk more about, and that is like, it's not just about tech,
Yeah,
right? It's about
exactly.
innovation, but it's also about being grounded as well, and knowing what is the pure need of the consumer and market. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank
Exactly.
you so much.
Thank you
Okay,
so
and that
much.
has been our latest episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. For more, you can always tune in. And as always, we hope you've gained a lot of insight from our talk today, and we'll see you next time. Sawasdee ka.
Techsauce, sparking innovative thoughts.